What if the part of you that you've been told is too sensitive is not actually your greatest weakness? What if it becomes your greatest protection against manipulation once you learn how to use it properly? Because there is a significant difference between a wounded empath and a healed empath. A wounded empath can feel everything in the room and they become consumed by it. A healed and regulated empath can feel what is happening in the room without becoming owned by it. That distinction changes everything. When you're emotionally overloaded, hypervigilant, or disconnected from your own body, your sensitivity can make you vulnerable to manipulation. You may sense that something is wrong, but then immediately override your perception. You might over-explain, second-guess yourself, absorb another person's emotions, or become so focused on keeping the peace that you abandon your own internal signal. But when you are regulated, grounded, and anchored within yourself, your sensitivity actually begins to operate differently. You're no longer the sponge soaking up every emotional puddle in the vicinity. You actually become something closer to a tuning fork. You notice what is congruent. You notice what is distorted. You notice what does not quite ring true to you. And sometimes your calm presence creates a kind of friction for people who rely on confusion, emotional pressure, or social masks to maintain control. Not because you are attacking them and not because you need to expose them, but rather because you are no longer helping them maintain the illusion that they are so good at projecting. Let us begin with an important distinction. Your nervous system is not supposed to be a magical lie detector. You cannot diagnose dishonesty based on a tight chest, a strange feeling, or a person looking away at the wrong moment. Sometimes anxiety is just anxiety. Sometimes discomfort is your own history being activated. Sometimes another person is nervous because they are tired, socially awkward, or afraid of being misunderstood. Maybe they have social anxiety. Body signals are information. They are not always a verdict. However, when you become more regulated, you may become better at recognizing incongruence. You might notice the small gap between the words someone is using and the emotional atmosphere surrounding those words. You might also notice that their story keeps changing. You might notice that you feel unusually foggy after speaking with them, or you might even notice that the conversation continually moves away from the original issue and becomes centered on your tone, your sensitivity, or your supposed inability to let things go. And this is exactly where regulation matters. When your nervous system is chronically activated, everything can and often does feel like a threat. You're scanning constantly. You may be trying to interpret every facial expression, every micro facial expression, every detailed text message, and every subtle shift in someone's voice. That is not intuition in its clearest form. That is hypervigilance, and hypervigilance tends to feel urgent. It wants an answer immediately. It spirals, it creates stories, it searches for certainty because uncertainty feels unsafe. A regulated intuitive signal often feels much quieter. It might simply say, something is not aligned here. No drama, no frantic mental investigation, no need to assemble a detective board with photographs and red string before breakfast. It's just information. And a healed and regulated empath learns how to pause before reacting, because you notice the signal and then you return to your body. You watch the pattern, you allow the truth to reveal itself over time. And this is what makes you far more difficult to manipulate. There's a term I find useful here. It's somatic dissonance. What does that mean? Fundamentally, this is not a medical diagnosis. It's a practical way of describing the physical discomfort that can arise when the words being spoken do not match the reality you are experiencing. Someone tells you everything is fine, but your stomach tightens, or maybe you feel some pressure on your chest. Someone insists they're happy for you, but the conversation leaves you feeling strangely diminished, like they've taken something from you. Someone repeatedly tells you that you're imagining the problem, yet your body becomes increasingly tense whenever you are around them. The mistake many empaths make is assuming that every uncomfortable sensation is proof of another person's intention. It is not. Your body may actually be responding to the present moment. It may also be responding to a memory, an old relational pattern, or a fear you have carried for years. And this is exactly why the work is not simply about trusting every feeling that you have blindly. It is about building a relationship with your body that is steady enough to ask better questions. Is this feeling mine? Did it become before I entered this room or after? Does this person's behavior consistently match their words? Do I feel more grounded after speaking with this person or more confused? Am I observing a pattern or reacting to a single moment? A healed empath does not ignore the body, but you also do not hand the body a microphone and allow every sensation to deliver a 3-hour keynote presentation. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You listen, you regulate, and then you discern. When I talk about vibrational friction, I'm not suggesting that you need to float into a room glowing like a human salt lamp. I am talking about what happens when your presence becomes congruent. Your words, body, boundaries, and behavior begin to align. You stop laughing politely when something is inappropriate. You stop providing emotional reassurance to the person who has just crossed your boundary. And you stop rushing to fill an uncomfortable silence. Additionally, you stop explaining your perception 12 different ways in the hope that someone committed to misunderstanding you will finally approve of it. They'll finally get you. That just creates friction. People who are accustomed to using confusion, charm, intimidation, guilt, or emotional volatility often rely on your participation. They need you to become destabilized. They need you to defend yourself. They need you to doubt your memory. They need you to react emotionally so that your reaction becomes the new topic of conversation. But what happens when you don't do all of those things? What happens when you remain calm? What happens when you say, actually, that does not align with my experience, and then stop speaking? I know it's so hard for some of us. But what happens when you don't chase them into the labyrinth that they have created to trap you? Sometimes a person will become unexpectedly uncomfortable. They may over-explain. They may retreat. They may reveal more than they intended. They may become irritated or even aggressive because your nervous system is no longer available for emotional hijacking. This is not because you have developed your own aggressive energy. It's because you've withdrawn your consent and your participation from the performance. Your peace is disruptive to people who rely on chaos as camouflage. A healed and regulated empath does not necessarily unmask people by confronting them. Often, you unmask a dynamic by refusing to play your assigned role within it. In a toxic family system, your role may have been to smooth everything over, to remain silent, to absorb the tension, to accept the version of events that kept everyone else comfortable and in line. In a workplace, your role may have been to agree publicly while privately recognizing that something was deeply misaligned. In a friendship, perhaps your role might have been to provide endless empathy without requiring accountability. When you stop performing those roles, the system notices and they don't like it. And this is why healing can initially create more tension rather than less. You might think, I'm calmer now. I'm setting healthier boundaries. Why is everyone suddenly behaving so strangely towards me? Because the truth of the matter is some people are much more comfortable with your dysregulation. Your lack of boundaries made their system easier to maintain. Your self-doubt made it easier for other people to define reality for you. Your sensitivity was useful when it meant that you carried the emotional burden for the entire room, or system, in fact. But when sensitivity becomes discernment, the arrangement changes. You become the glitch in the matrix, not because you need to destroy the system, but because you no longer automatically reinforce it. Groups can develop shared narratives that nobody is allowed to question. Families do this, friendship groups do this, corporate cultures do this, online communities certainly do this, often before morning tea. There may be an unspoken rule that a particular person is never challenged. There may be a collective agreement that an unhealthy workplace is actually a family. There may be pressure to smile, comply, and pretend that a dynamic is healthy because questioning it would create inconvenience. This can be particularly difficult for empaths and highly sensitive people because you may sense the tension beneath the surface long before anyone is willing to name it. You notice that the words and the atmosphere are telling two completely different stories. But the invitation is not to become the person who spends every waking hour correcting the emotional weather forecast for everyone else. Your work is to remain connected to your own truth. That may mean speaking, and it may mean asking a simple question. It may mean refusing to participate, and it may mean leaving. Maintaining your internal signal does not always collapse the false narrative publicly, but it stops that narrative from colonizing your mind, and that is sovereignty. For years, many empaths have been told they're too sensitive, too emotional, too easily affected, too intense, too perceptive. Sometimes you may have internalized that message and concluded that your sensitivity is actually the problem. So sensitivity is not the problem. I'm here to tell you, sensitivity without boundaries is kind of the problem, and it's exhausting. Sensitivity without nervous system regulation becomes chaotic. Sensitivity without discernment can make you vulnerable to carrying emotions that were never yours to begin with. But sensitivity itself is not a flaw. When it is grounded, it becomes precision. You notice nuance. You recognize subtle shifts. You detect patterns. You become less seduced by charisma and more interested in consistency. You stop confusing a compelling performance with integrity. And perhaps most importantly, you stop needing to win every argument, because once you are anchored in your own body, you understand that silence can be profoundly disruptive. Not the silence of fear or freeze, not the silence of suppression, the silence of non-participation. The silence that says, I heard what you said, I've observed what you did, I do not need to debate my own reality with you. That is very different from shutting down. That is self-possession. So how do you work with this practically? Well, first, regulate before you interpret. Slow your breathing. Come into your body. Feel your feet on the floor. Relax your jaw. Drop your shoulders down. And take a moment before responding. You do not need to solve the entire situation while your nervous system is sounding every alarm in the building. Second, separate the sensation from the story. You might say to yourself, I feel tightness in my chest, I feel confused, I feel pressure to respond or react quickly. That is the somatic information. The story might be, this person is definitely lying, they're trying to destroy me, I need to prove it immediately. But I would encourage you to pause before merging the sensation with the story. Third, observe patterns rather than isolated moments. Does their behavior consistently contradict their words? Do you repeatedly leave conversations feeling disoriented? Are your boundaries respected when you express them clearly? Does this person take accountability when their actions cause harm? Do they apologize? Discernment grows through patterns. Look at the person's actions versus their words. Fourth, resist emotional urgency. Manipulative dynamics often create pressure. It's on purpose. They want you to decide now, respond immediately, explain yourself again, prove that you are kind, prove that you are not angry, prove that you are not difficult. It's exhausting. You do not have to enter the emotional courtroom every time someone issues you a summons. And finally, choose your level of engagement carefully. Not every illusion requires your intervention. Not every inconsistency deserves a confrontation. And not every person has earned access to your energy, your insight, or your analysis. Sometimes the most powerful response is clarification. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is silence. And sometimes it is complete detachment. We are living in an era of social masks, curated identities, misinformation, and relentless emotional and energetic noise. You are exposed to more opinions before breakfast than previous generations encountered in an entire week, maybe even in a month. If you're sensitive, intuitive, or highly perceptive, your work is not to absorb all of it. Your work is to strengthen the fidelity of your own internal signal. And that means reducing unnecessary noise, taking breaks from constant input, returning to your body, paying attention to the quality of your relationships, choosing grounded people, noticing whether a conversation leaves you clearer or more fragmented, and remembering that discernment is not the same as suspicion. A healed and regulated empath is not walking through life looking for liars behind every pot plant. You're learning to recognize truth by becoming more truthful within yourself. Your body, words, boundaries, and values, they will naturally begin to align. And from that place, you become far less available for distortion. You don't need to expose every mask, and you don't need to disrupt every illusion. You do not need to convince everyone to see what you see. You simply start betraying what you know in order to make other people feel comfortable. That is the contradictory secret. Your sensitivity is not what makes you weak. It is what makes you perceptive. Your regulation is what makes that perception reliable. Your boundaries are what makes that perception useful. And your willingness to stand calmly in your own truth is what makes manipulation far more difficult to sustain. You do not need to become louder. You need to become more anchored. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who no longer needs to participate in the lie. As I always say, and I encourage you to remember, regulation first, intuition follows. And until next time, please be gentle with yourself. If you've enjoyed this video, please do ensure that you like, share, and subscribe. Perhaps give it to somebody who you know needs a little bit of encouragement at this time.